welcome to the Flightcast, a place where opinions aren't right or wrong, and where we can agree or disagree about movies, TV, and other assorted media because it's all subjective. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. It's cold. It's cold. It's that time of year, isn't it? It's warmer today up here in Michigan. But if you live in the Midwest, if you live anywhere, like, Midwestern states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, cold. Like, break out the heavy winter coats. Cold, seriously. It's supposed to warm up. It's supposed to be like in the 60s over the weekend. But whatever, enough grousing about the weather. I really got one big thing to talk about today. And no, it's not about these new DC TV shows. I already made my point with respect to any new DC TV news. And if you haven't heard it, it's over at patreon.com/theflightcast. I did an episode of Flight Speed about it and talked about it on the way home, not from work, but from the gym, with respect to my thoughts on that. And it's not necessarily about the Super Mario Galaxy trailer. That also is at patreon.com/theflightcast, or rather it will be after I post this particular episode. No, I'm going to talk about the DCU, and I'm going to talk about a little piece that Dave the Film Junkie and many others have been talking about. Ben Everett's at Real Anarchy and others have talked about this for about the last week or so, and I haven't given my thoughts with respect to it, and I'm going to talk about that Forbes piece. I am going to talk about that Forbes piece with respect to the profitability of Superman, and there are a couple of angles that I have to take with respect to this particular story. I have not read it yet, not, in its entirety. I know bits and pieces, or at least what people have been talking about, but I have not read it fully, so this is going to be a full, examination, if you will, into the Mark Hughes piece, and right there, just starting with the name of that particular individual, thereby hangs a tale with respect to my own perspective on this. But before diving headfirst into the profitability of the DCU's so far only film, I want to remind everybody that is listening to this show, whether you're a brand new listener or a long-time listener, you can find this show and all of my other shows at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. This show comes out on Wednesdays. On Fridays, on specific Fridays with certain new releases, you can catch an episode of Flight Review where I am now reviewing movies that I see in the theater on the way home from the theater. I did that last week with Predator Badlands. Yes, a full spoiler-filled review of Predator Badlands. Flight Review, that was last Friday. There's a new one this Friday because I'm going to see The Running Man. I have to see The Running Man. I am a fan of, not the original. I can't call it the original. I'm a fan of the first film, the Arnold film from the 80s. But that's loosely based off of the Stephen King Running Man novel, which I hear this new movie by Edgar Wright starring Glenn Powell, who's in every damn thing these days. And Jamie Lawson's in a lot of stuff too. Jamie Lawson, of course, she's the Bella Real, the mayor of Gotham, in The Batman. And most recently, she was Pearline, the singer in Sinners, and boy was she awesome in that movie. She was awesome in both movies. But yeah, and then Coleman Domingo, and add some Josh Brolin in for good measure, directed by Edgar Wright. Well, why the hell wouldn't I see this movie anyway? Oh yeah, by the way, it's based off of the Running Man novel by Stephen King. Yeah, I'm going to see it. I'm going to see it this Friday. So prepare for another episode of Flight Review on the way home from that movie this upcoming Friday, and then this Saturday, an episode of Flight Chat. There was not a Flight Chat episode last week for two reasons. One, time got away from me because last Saturday I participated in the Geekverse Ultimate Alliance podcast, their charity event that they have every year. This is my 5th year in a row, according to Travis Snell, who's a bigwig over there. This is the 5th year in a row that I participated in the trivia battle. That's part of their charity event that they do every year for BC Children's Hospital. It's a great cause, obviously. Any children's hospital, any cause like that, you want to support for sure, especially if you get to embarrass yourself in geeky form by getting trivia questions wrong. But this year, I wasn't getting questions wrong. I was asking tough questions because I was asked to host the DC portion of the trivia by Mr. Snell, and we had a blast. We had a lot of fun with it. I stressed over the questions. I did get to ask all 20 of my questions, and I thought I did an awesome job, or at least the guys thought that I did an awesome job, which is great. I didn't want my questions to be too difficult, but I also didn't want them to be too easy. And I feel like I hit a sweet spot. I do, because there were definitely people that knew the answers to what I was asking, not necessarily who I was asking. And yeah, it was entertaining. At least I thought it was entertaining. I had a blast. I had a fun time. It's always great hanging out with those guys. Travis, Dave the Film Junkie was part of it. Ben Everts was part of it. Chris Balga, our good buddy, as well, part of their network, was part of it as well. A number of others. Forgive me if I don't remember everybody that was a part of that particular trivia event, but it is awesome. And so I was doing that Saturday evening. And then on top of that, we only got a couple of emails. There really wasn't a whole lot to do, like a full-throated show, if you will. I imagine there'll be more. I think John and a couple of the others have sent a few more emails since then. So we'll definitely have a Flight Chat episode this particular Saturday as far as listener feedback is concerned. So don't worry about that. So one more time, main show on Wednesdays, Flight Review, select episodes of Flight Review on Fridays when I go see a brand new movie, and Saturdays is for Flight Chat, the listener feedback show. Those are all the topside shows available at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And then I also want to take a moment to thank all of the very loyal supporters of patreon.com/theflightcast. Thank you to any new supporters, any new subscribers. There's 3 new tiers. There's Flight Cadet, Flight Crew, Flight Officer. Flight Cadet, if you sign up there, gets you access to Flight Speed and Friday Flight, the episodes that I do. Flight Speed is the show that I just talked about, where I talked about the whole thing with respect to the announced shows that allegedly James Gunn and Peter Safran are developing for the DCU that James Gunn still to this day, a couple days later, has said nothing about. At least not that I'm aware of. I've seen no posts on Threads whatsoever, but I give my whole thoughts with respect to either of those ideas, if you will, whether it's V for Vendetta or this Jimmy Olsen show, on Flight Speed. That's on Mondays, and then on Fridays, Friday Flight, or when I don't get a chance to do when I do a Saturday soliloquy, which, forgive me, I didn't do either one last week, because again, time got away from me with respect to all of that, but I will definitely endeavor to do that this particular Friday. So those 2 shows are available for Flight Cadet members. Flight Crew members get access to that, plus Sun Just Don't Rants, and I've got a couple of Sun Just Don't Rants that are boiling up here. A couple of fan rants that I definitely think I'm going to let loose a little bit, uncensored, if you will, on Patreon. So you'll get access to that as well. And then the Flight Officer tier, that gets you access to everything, including the bonus episodes, a Flight Review, some Flight Chat episodes that I did beforehand, not listener feedback, but just topics that I was talking about. That's kind of evolved a little bit into Friday Flight and Saturday Soliloquy as well, but also bonus episodes of Flight Box, Flight Report, whenever I start reading comics again. And there was my specialty show that I did last month called Flight Fright, which was the spooky season show where I reviewed 7 different spooky films, gave them each an individual episode, and had some really in-depth, spoiler-filled thoughts about all of them. So that gets you access to that bonus content as well, and more bonus content with other movies that I intend to watch and review going forward. So that's all at patreon.com/theflightcast. I'm also going to do another show with respect to the free tier, because I know a number of people have jumped on the free tier and are like free subscribers to the Patreon. I think I'm going to post something there, maybe a Flight Alert episode with respect to the Super Mario Galaxy trailer, because the Super Mario Galaxy movie trailer, because the first one of those has popped up, and yeah, I definitely have some thoughts. Oh yeah, I have some thoughts. I got to talk about my favorite little Italian plumber, and just the cinematic glory that he is finally being given on the big screen. Can't wait for that. But all that's at patreon.com/theflightcast. I hope that you're all enjoying the bonus content. Can't thank you enough for your support to patreon.com/theflightcast. Stay tuned for more bonus content for all of those tiers, all 4 of those tiers, the free tier and the 3 paid tiers as well. All right, let's get into it. This whole Superman profitability discussion. Now, originally, I thought that this was 2 different pieces. I thought Hollywood Reporter or Variety had come out with something else, but no. As it turns out, I think everybody was just sourcing this Forbes piece, which right off the bat, I will tell you, unfortunately, it does seem that this is locked behind a paywall. Now, I've had this link open on my computer for the past couple of days. Why? Because apparently it's my first of 3 free articles. If I become a Forbes member, I can subscribe to, quote, trusted journalism that empowers your journey. Well, I don't know about that. I'll think about it. I mean, really, there's only one writer or so, Mark Hughes being one of them, that I would even remotely listen to on Forbes, and there's some real doozies of, not great people that write for Forbes. One in particular that I just personally loathe, whose name I shan't speak aloud, but I will say that it rhymes with Dot Brendelson. I'll just say that. That particular moron. But at any rate, this particular piece came out 4 days ago that people were talking about because it's Wednesday the 12th. This was published on November 8th. I think this is misspelled. It's titled DCU Endgame, missing the D. What is James Gunn's superhero universe building toward? And this was written by Mark Hughes, who is listed as a contributor to Forbes, an entertainment writer who he's written for Forbes for years. And he and I used to be mutuals back during the old days of Twitter, before the South African Nazi destroyed it. And, it was just a moderate cesspool that you could actually wade through and have some decent conversations with amidst the trolling and the nonsense before it just completely turned into a Nazi hellscape within the last year or so. He and I were mutuals. The last time we really had any interaction was he was one of the people that, pushed back on my whole idea about how, all opinions are subjective. There's no such thing as an objective opinion. And it's unfortunate when you run into people that don't understand that opinions are not factual, and that even though the only factual thing about it is that you have feelings, none of what you feel, emotionally speaking, as an opinion, it is factual in what regard with respect to how a movie is made or how a TV show is made or an acting choice or a creative choice or whatnot. No, all of it is wholly subjective because it's meant to incite your emotions, and anytime emotions are involved, that completely throws objectivity out the window. He is just another person that disagreed with me on that, and it's unfortunate. It's the last time we had any real conversation back and forth. We used to have conversations back and forth, but I think unfortunately he probably lumped me in with, many of the other DC trolls because he's gone on both sides of it, if you will, and dealt with rational DC fans, and he's also dealt with the very irrational DC fans. But I haven't really read anything of his in a number of years, to be honest with you, especially since leaving Twitter. I've been off Twitter/X for nearly 3 years at this point, and I don't miss it. I really have no intentions of returning whatsoever. Not that anybody has necessarily asked me to return. But at any rate, Mark Hughes is somebody that back in the days of the DCEU, right, the turmoil and the transition period, if you will, from the early days of the DCEU, the Snyderverse plan, to what Walter Hamada bastardized it into later on, Mark Hughes was definitely in the middle of that, was definitely somebody writing about all of that. And there were times where, he was scooper mad in his light, but he would try to bring some rationality. At least he would attempt to, most of the time. Yeah, I didn't agree with everything that he wrote, and I still don't necessarily probably agree with everything that he says, certainly not when it comes to the idea of objective opinions. But he is the writer of this piece, and it has definitely caused some conversation, if you will. So let's dive headfirst into what Mr. Hughes is saying about the DCU Endgame. What is James Gunn's superhero universe building towards? Here we go. He says, with either a split, a merger, or both on the horizon for Warner Brothers Discovery, the speculation machine is ramping up regarding the DCU Endgame, that's spelled correctly, and what James Gunn's superhero cinematic universe is building toward. It's got a subhead here. DCU has super success, and he says there's a lot of mistaken analysis out there about Gunn, the DCU, and Superman. Some websites, mostly on low-quality fan sites that push rumors and clickbait, are trying to spin things as if Superman is some sort of box office failure and that audiences aren't interested. The film generated more than $100 million in profits, had great reviews and audience scores, and did big numbers in theaters and home entertainment. But you can safely ignore it and anyone pushing those false narratives. All right, so time out before getting into the rest of it. That's the piece that I think got a lot of people's attention. It's in parentheses, where he says the film generated more than $100 million in profits, had great reviews and audience scores, and did big numbers in theaters and home entertainment. Now, I don't know if anyone has done a further breakdown of what that $100 million in profits entails, but that doesn't have to only encompass theatrical in that regard, because listen to what he says. Great reviews, audience scores, big numbers in theaters, and home entertainment. So home entertainment numbers do count. And that's something that we really, as a collective fan base, those of us that are rational, that's something that we really have to drum into the heads of these other morons. The fact that home entertainment numbers do count. And to be clear, 9 years ago, this was an argument we had about BVS. Because when we were talking about the profitability of that film, the home entertainment numbers absolutely factored in. And of course, the mob, the people, the anti-Snyders and the MCU fanboys that just wanted to shit all over DC at the time and, drag Snyder through the mud the way they've really been doing for nearly the last decade. They didn't want to hear any part of that. They don't want to hear any data, any information, any numbers that pretty much lay waste to their narrative. The idea that these movies are not profitable, right? So they're not going to, regard it. They're going to dismiss it as much as possible. They're going to try and restrict it to theatrical only. But ever now more than ever, like even more than 9 years ago, home entertainment numbers are a big deal. And I'm not just talking streaming. I'm talking about VOD. I'm talking about physical sales, right? The fact that I pre-ordered, here's a bit of a story just with respect to Superman. Sidebar here. I pre-ordered the 4K Steelbook of Superman from Grove.com. And the problem was that I reserved it before July 22nd. Now, what happened on July 22nd is that their website switched their entire service as far as taking pre-orders and whatnot to shop.com, which is fine. Shop.com is awesome. I use it for a lot of other things. The only thing is it changed the process in terms of how things are pre-ordered, because initially through Grove's homegrown service, you could pre-order without paying up front. Shop.com makes you pay up front. So my pre-order for Superman 4K Steelbook was placed on like a grandfathered list, and it was locked into a payment method that wasn't available at the time. And so I get an email the week that this thing's supposed to come out saying, your payment method didn't work. Please update your payment method. And I tried my damnedest for 3 days to update this payment method, because it goes, if you don't update it within 72 hours, it will be canceled. And I went, well, no, don't cancel it. Don't cancel it. Now, I had one also pre-ordered at Amazon just to be on the safe side. I was not going to get left in the dark. However, people that reserved the movie on Amazon were having struggles getting their copies as well. A lot of them didn't get it on September 23rd like it was supposed to. A lot of them got it weeks, maybe even a month or so later because of delays. And why were there delays? Was it simply a lack of items? Was it simply a supply and demand situation where the demand was that high and the supply was that low? Yeah, somewhere in between with respect to that. I tried my damnedest for 3 days to update this payment method, and it just wouldn't because it was outdated. So here's what happens. I get a notification on the third day, the day that my pre-order is going to get canceled, and I go, well, shit, I'm just going to have to wait for the Amazon one to hit, right? The day that my pre-order from Grove was supposed to be canceled, that third day, that 72nd hour, if you will, I get a notification from my Steelbook Discord that now all of a sudden the Superman movie is available, is in stock again. And so I quickly, through the shop.com app, bought one. Flat out. Because they hadn't taken my money yet. Right? The other payment method that I had used months earlier to reserve this that was no longer available, that I couldn't switch out, like they had taken no money from me. So I took the payment method that was good, and I immediately bought one. And not only did they send me a confirmation that they were going to ship it to me within a couple of days, an hour after they sent me that confirmation, they send me another email telling me, we're sorry, your previous pre-order has been canceled. I'm like, okay, so let me get this straight. More than likely, the one that you canceled that I originally pre-ordered, that was more than likely the one that allowed you to tell people, hey, it's in stock again. And I was able to pounce on it as quickly as possible. So pretty much the one that they canceled is the one that they sent to me anyway, that I bought outright. Ridiculous. I say all of this to say that wasn't an easy Steelbook to obtain. And make no mistake, the grifters on eBay, the scalpers, they were out in full force. There's a fool out there right now, and I'm saying fool because I'm censoring myself. There's a fool out there selling that Superman 4K Steelbook for $70, and the picture that he has posted is a stack of them. He bought a stack of them and is openly rubbing it in your face that he bought a bunch of them and now he's marking them up. That person should be arrested, and if they have any onions down there, they should be removed. That's as PC as I can say it. I have absolutely no respect for scalpers whatsoever. They're all going to burn in a very special level of hell. But I bring all this up to say that there has definitely been a demand for Superman with respect to 4K home media for collectors in that regard. So, that is something that we all must continue to take into account when we talk about the numbers and the profitability of these films. Of course, there's the one major thing that, eliminates any profitability argument, but I'll get to that later. after we get through the rest of this Mark Hughes piece. But right there, that $100 million in profits, that was what perked everybody's ears up. Intriguing, $100 million in profits. And he's saying based on that, his sentence is that some websites are trying to spin things as if Superman is some sort of box office failure and that audiences aren't interested. But he says we can safely ignore it and anyone pushing those false narratives because in his words, Mark Hughes that is, he says what's actually happening is very simple. Warner Brothers Discovery is up for buyout, and some fans want certain studios to buy it and fire Gunn to reinstall whatever personal preferences those fans have about DC movies. The theory is that studios will see fans acting mad and hear fan blogs claiming Superman was a failure, and that somehow those studio executives will be generally ignorant enough of how movies and box office and profits work to fall for it. Hint, they aren't, he says. Any changes a buyer wanted to implement would likely fall within a narrow range, but I think the primary DCU plans will remain as is. Now, I should note that the part that says any changes a buyer wanted to implement likely would fall within a narrow range, there's a link to that. A link to another piece, which I don't necessarily want to click on because I don't want to get I don't want to use up another one of my free articles, my goodness. But maybe we'll cross that bridge when we come to it later. But he says that Gunn's Superman is the most popular superhero film of 2025 and it reset audience interest in DC with a box office result at least 40% or more higher than any of the previous 9 DCEU movies from the past 8 years. It beat all 3 Marvel Studio releases this year, including Marvel's summer tentpole Fantastic Four First Steps. Now, let's focus on that for a second, shall we? A box office result of at least 40% or more higher than any of the previous 9 DCEU movies from the past 8 years. So, to be clear, there are 15 movies in the DCEU. The 9 movies he's talking about is everything after Aquaman, because Aquaman is movie 6. So basically, the entire Walter Hamada era. No, Aquaman doesn't count. Because remember, even though Aquaman was released during the Walter Hamada era, it was in full pre-production when he took over DC Films in January 2018. So no, Aquaman is not a Walter Hamada DCEU film. It's the last vestige of the first part of the DCEU, the Snyderverse, if you will. I have made this argument before. Argue with a wall. Seriously, I'm not entertaining arguments with respect to that one, because objectively speaking, that film was finished as far as filming was concerned. Principal photography was complete, and it was in 13 months. It had started 13 months of post-production before Walter Hamada took over and started making his silly, aimless decisions with respect to that. So that means that every movie after that, both Shazam films, Wonder Woman 1984, Black Adam, Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, The Flash, Blue Beetle, even Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, even The Suicide Squad, all of those films, those 9 movies, that's what he's talking about. Yes, Superman blew all of them out of the water. It's not even close. Like, at least 40% or more higher, right? Because none of them eclipsed it. What was the highest grossing movie out of all of those movies, right? 9 movies. Here, just one more time to go through them, right? Shazam was movie 7. To Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn was 8. Wonder Woman 1984 was 9. Yes, 2020 for both of those. I know, COVID year, whatever it is, what it is. The Suicide Squad was movie 10, which I didn't even see in theaters. A lot of us saw that on HBO Max and kept it moving. Black Adam was number 11. Shazam! Fear of the Gods was 12. The Flash was 13. Blue Beetle was 14. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom was 15. Out of those 9 movies, what was your highest earner? Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, which made $440 million globally. After that, Black Adam, which made $393 million globally. Then Shazam at $360 some odd million, if you will. Then The Flash at $271. Then Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn at $205. Everything else under that. Specifically for the last 9 movies in the DCEU's catalog, if you will. None of them even came close to touching Superman's $600+ million gross whatsoever, right? And whether the haters want to admit this or not, that's precisely what the executives are looking at. They're looking at the last 9 movies. I mean, that's enough of a track record, isn't it, right? Like, for all the people, and we'll go ahead and talk about the delusional humps that think that, whatever failure, whoever buys Warner Brothers Discovery is just going to, get rid of Gunn and resume the Snyderverse. Well, that would mean that those executives, whoever it is, would have to blatantly ignore the financial results of the last 9 movies of the DCEU and only focus on the financial results of the first 6 movies of the DCEU. And mind you, they're there, right? I've made no bones about the fact that the first 4 movies in the DCEU, from Man of Steel through Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, through Suicide Squad, but Suicide Squad, into Wonder Woman, made $3 billion. Those first 4 films made $3 billion. That's an average of $750 million per in that regard. And then comes the Justice League bomb, which ruins everything, but Aquaman survives thanks to Jason Momoa and James Wan and makes $1 billion. That's it. That's the last time the DCEU saw notable financial success. 2018, December of 2018. It was a colossal letdown and a financial failure ever since then. And this is somebody that has all 15 movies talking here. I'm not just talking out of my ass, I'm not talking on both sides of my mouth here. Financially speaking, the DCEU was more than a dud. Your most successful DC films in the Walter Hamada era were Joker, which he hedged his bets on and, didn't fully invest in the first place, and The Batman, which was Matt Reeves saving his bacon to the tune of $772 million, separated from the DCEU. So that's what these fools are counting on. They're counting on any executives from whomever, whether it's Paramount, whether it's Netflix, whether it's Universal, whoever it is. They're counting on those executives blatantly ignoring the last 9 movies and only focusing on the first 6 movies. Ridiculous. Absolutely delusional to believe that executives would just skip all of that failure. That's 7 years of financial failure, if you will. Well, okay, 5 years of financial failure, because if we're saying the DCEU failed, or ended rather, in 2023, then yeah, it's from 2019, right, essentially, when the first Shazam movie released, to 2023. Okay, so 4 years, fine, whatever. 4 years of failure in that regard. And there are delusional humps out there that really believe that any studio that buys Warner Bros. Discovery is going to ignore all of that and go all the way back to 7 years ago and resurrect the Snyderverse because of how much money it made back then. Get a grip. Seriously. Not going to happen. Mark Hughes is 100% correct in that regard. It's stupid. It's ridiculous. Anybody trying to push any nonsensical narratives about Superman being a flop, no. They're not going to get the result that they're looking for. There's no way that these studios are going to focus on the first 6 and ignore the last 9. And that's not even getting into the rest of this sentence, right? Which is, it beat all 3 Marvel Studio releases this year, including Marvel Summer Tentpole Fantastic Four First Steps. And it does not matter. I cannot stress this enough. It does not matter how you feel about the MCU right now. It does not matter that you think this is a down year for them. It does not matter that you think that they're aimless. It does not matter that you think that they've dropped off in quality. The fact of the matter is, as far as those executives are concerned, 4 comic book movies released in 2025, DC beat them all out. DC won the year. That means something to executives. They are paying attention to that. That is the number one thing that they will cite. The fact that Superman beat the Fantastic Four and Captain America and the Thunderbolts, right? So that means that David Corenswet and James Gunn beat Pedro Pascal and Vanessa Kirby and that ilk, right? And Julia Garner, that grouping, right? They also beat Florence Pugh, internet darling that so many people love, along with Julia Louis-Dreyfus and David Harbour, a.k.a. Hopper from Stranger Things, which I still haven't watched to this day. So they beat them out, and they beat out Sam Wilson, Captain America. Anthony Mackie with Giancarlo Esposito as a villain and Harrison Ford as an antagonist character, if you will, right, in support in that movie, and throwing a little bit of Sebastian Shaw for good measure, right? Superman beat all that out. DC beat all of that. And so you think, not you listening to this show, but these humps, these delusional humps believe that these executives are going to ignore that as well. Give me a break. No, Mark Hughes is 1,000% correct in this regard with respect to what studios are actually going to focus on. And that's something that, whether people wish to accept it or not, that is the truth. Those are ironclad facts. We're not speaking an opinion and a hyperbole here. Superman did beat each and every one of the last 9 DCEU releases in terms of box office to the tune of 40% or higher gross, and it did beat all 3 Marvel Studio releases this year, including Fantastic Four. Period. Whether you want to argue it or not, it's the truth. You can't argue facts. Facts are mean. Sorry. Regardless to any of the narratives out there. So let's continue with Mark Hughes' piece. He says Superman also earned universal critical acclaim and high audience scores, as well as strong streaming numbers and home entertainment sales and rentals. The film will have generated significantly more than $100 million in profits and approaching $150 million globally when all is said and done this year. It's not a failure. It didn't underperform. It was widely beloved by mainstream audiences and most fans, and no amount of resentment or wishes or lies will change those facts. Again, he is correct. And he's carefully wording things here because he says more than $100 million in profits and approaching $150 million globally when all is said and done. He didn't say box office. He didn't say ticket sales. He said profits. And he said globally. He didn't restrict it to any particular market. He said profits globally, which means home entertainment, which means whatever other sales, POV, the 4K, even the scalpers probably don't count, but whatever money the scalpers originally paid Grub and Amazon to get those dozens of copies that they're marking up like assholes on eBay, that all factors into it. Profit. And that is all, at the end of the day, that these studios care about. Profit. They want to see a return on their investment. This is why David Zaslav, a big part of why he took that victory lap after that opening weekend, because he saw the potential. He saw what was going to happen with this. He saw the same, the streaming numbers, the streaming number potential rather, the home entertainment sale potential, and the critical acclaim. The critical acclaim is there. That thing was certified fresh within an hour. It was on the Hell site. For whatever we think of the Hell site, these studios hold it in some higher regard. We know this. We've seen this. A number of them have an investment in it, monetarily speaking. They use it as a marketing tool in that regard. And so when they see that, they go, great, we can use this. We can say certified fresh. We can put the damn stupid tomato meter logo on our packaging and on our ads and on our, billboards and stuff like that, right? That's all important to them, period. It's not a failure. It didn't underperform. And it was widely beloved by mainstream audiences. We've seen the reactions. We've seen people talk about it on TikTok. I have brought up examples. I've written about examples. I wrote about a TikToker, Nika Marina, who is a huge, gigantic Marvel fan, called herself like a Marvel girl and all this and whatnot, and she still can't get that movie out of her head. Superman, that is. She's still talking about Superman. It's been months, and she's still talking about that damn movie. That's how impactful that particular movie was. It doesn't matter if you hate it. It doesn't matter if you didn't care for it as much as Man of Steel or even the Christopher Reeve films or whatever else. The fact of the matter is it made a mark. It made an impression on the audience at large. I saw it 4 times. It made an impression on me. And the one dude, I will remind you, the one asshole that tried to boo at the opening night got stared at and silenced because he was the one fool that decided to speak while everybody else was clapping and applauding. Whatever. Take your negative ass out of the theater. No one told you to come see a movie that you weren't going to like in that regard. Whatever. So moving forward, it says the DCU and the future. He says, now let's get to the serious discussion. Okay, well, here we go. He's brought up some really good facts at this point, but let's see about this serious discussion he's talking about. He says, first of all, and to get it out of the way, whomever buys Warner Brothers Discovery or Warner Brothers post-split should keep James Gunn and Peter Safran as co-CEOs of DC Studios and let them continue unimpeded in their plans for building up the DCU. He says, I personally think it's glaringly obvious that Apple should buy Warner Brothers Discovery or Warner Brothers, and that it would be a bit crazy not to do so, frankly. All right. Now, let me just address that for a second. Here's where I think he gets into his, and he does this. Mark Hughes will get into his editorialized, opinionated thing. Apple's not buying Warner Brothers Discovery. It's not happening. And I'll tell you why it's not happening. Now, and you can go ahead and cite this if I turn out to be wrong. But I've said before, Apple doesn't need Warner Brothers Discovery. Apple does not need a major outfit like DC. They don't need to commit the money to it. Now, they could. They most certainly could. If they felt like it, they could absolutely flex their muscles. Either Tim Cook or Jeff Bezos could flex their muscles and buy DC and buy Warner Bros. And get that library. They could. They absolutely could do that. But Apple doesn't need to. And the reason Apple doesn't need to is because content is not their bread and butter. It's not even their second industry as far as their secondary industry as far as profit is concerned. Their first industry is tech. Their second industry is support. Their third industry is content. And they literally use their content to sell their tech and their services going forward. That's what they do. They're able to spend $1 billion a year on content because they bring in $9.5 billion profit on a yearly basis. At least that's what last year's numbers were. So there's no priority for them to buy Warner Brothers Discovery. There just isn't. They could, and if they did, I don't think it would be a bad thing, but there's no priority for them to do so. So I don't see why he thinks it's glaringly obvious that they should buy it. I mean, this is another one that a link is attached to, so maybe I'll click this later. Maybe I'll use up both of my other free articles. I've only got 2 left, right? So we'll leave that link where it is as well. But no, I will go ahead and say I disagree with that. Apple's not going to buy Warner Brothers Discovery. It's not going to happen. He says, though, that his guess is that Gunn is building towards something that's not Justice League. He says, I'm not claiming that's a unique guess or inspired by deep insight, as Gunn all but said as much publicly about upcoming plans and what to expect or not expect. He says, I believe it will be a version of the Super Friends, and if so, then I would expect a Super Friends versus Legion of Doom movie. You know how I feel about fan speculation. I'm not willing to go that far. I'm willing to let James Gunn and Peter Safran take us on the journey, and I will enjoy the journey, and we will see what shakes out at the end of it. Because the minute you start speculating on what they're going to do, that's when you set yourself up for disappointment. And we went through this just recently with the Peacemaker season finale. A lot of us did. And yes, Anthony and a number of others, didn't set themselves, avoided that level set themselves. I get it. I didn't. Whatever. Fans set themselves up for expectations all the time. I'm not going to do that any further. As I said before with Peacemaker Season 2 finale, this is my Last Jedi example for James Gunn. I now no longer will speculate on what he's going to do with the future of the DCU. I'm just going to wait and see exactly what he does, which is another reason I'm not talking about this V for Vendetta or this Jimmy Olsen show that allegedly are both going to happen. But continuing with Hughes' piece, he says, or perhaps it'll be a Justice Gang versus Injustice Gang, since the latter is from a Grant Morrison JLA comic book story, and Gunn loves Morrison's work. Maybe. Gunn also used Justice Gang in the Superman movie, he says, which might just be a funny homage or maybe setting it up. He says, I don't seriously expect this, since the mainstream movie-going public would have no association with those names and titles, but it's amusing to consider the possibility. Amusing for you. For me, it's just white noise, but whatever. He says, my other main guess would be some sort of adaptation, so he's just in full speculation mode here. Some sort of adaptation on the iconic comic book miniseries Kingdom Come, but only loosely adapted into the current DCU continuity instead of set in the future. Superman's desire to be a positive role model and inspiration for other superheroes, but the fact a lot of them ignore his higher moral code and cause lots of destruction and even commit murder, mirrors themes and events in that beloved comic story, as does the existence of an alternate dimensional world used as a prison for superhumans the world wants to get rid of. Okay? Wonderful speculation there, Mark Hughes. Good for you if it turns out to be the truth. We'll see. He says, side note here, for what it's worth, and I know it's not worth much these days to some folks over there, he says, I'd hold a Kingdom Come for a distant future film after taking lots of time to build up the DCU and then do a big faithful adaptation in 2 parts. Short of that, however, I just license it to Netflix for Zack Snyder to adapt as a live-action film. In the future of the DCEU and with his previous cast of superheroes, those willing to return, and if some like Ben Affleck had no interest in returning, then Snyder could use Michael Keaton as the post-to-Flash version of the DCEU. I feel like that entire paragraph is just him, doing the fan disclaimer, right? Like trying to remind us, oh, I'm a fan, I know the lore, and I liked the DCEU, don't come for me, right? I feel like that's what that entire paragraph was. That was such a meaningless side note for me, personally. He can say whatever he wants. He can speculate whenever he wants. And there's a lot more speculation going forward here. He says there's also some possible hints that perhaps Gunn is going to do a big twist on the build-up to a superhero team-up movie approach. What if instead the big DCU crossover event is loosely adapting Salvation Run, with primarily a big cast of supervillains in an ensemble, and Luthor is one of the leads? I think he already said he wasn't going to adapt Salvation Run. I'm pretty sure he said that. Gunn, that is. But either way. He says consider that they're setting up both the Salvation Prison Planet and Checkmate elements of that story, plus Luthor as probably some sort of anti-hero in Gunn's upcoming Man of Tomorrow movie scheduled for release in 2027, which Gunn has described more of a Lex Luthor story than Superman story, but also with Luthor in his traditional supervillain armored suit. All right, yada yada yada. There's lots of potential ways to make the Super Friends the existing superhero team-up of the DCU in story without a little cross-up team over. This is all just speculation on what they're going to do, yada yada yada. I don't really care about the rest of this. I really don't. These shared elements with Final Crisis, no, I don't care, Mark Hughes. is the rest of this just speculation on what he's going to do? No, if that's all the rest of this article is, I don't care. I really do not care what his speculation is. And while he goes on, man, theory of possibilities for the DCU's future, yada yada yada. Let's get to the last paragraph. This is more in line with the factual stuff he was bringing up earlier. I really couldn't give less than two shits about Mark Hughes' editorialism. Not trying to be rude. It's just, no, it's not the point of me reading this. He says, whatever the DCU's current plans, it's true that some potential buyers might be more likely to shut down Gunn's plans in favor of their own. But I think most studios, he says, will recognize the importance of the DC brand and how well it's positioned now and wouldn't risk upsetting those plans. The ones who would are also probably the least likely to win a bidding war now. He says, I'm probably way off in my own guesses about what's to come, but we likely won't get many clues until next year's Lantern series, Supergirl, and Clayface movies. Until then, we'll have to keep waiting and keep guessing. All right, that's the extent of the Hughes piece. So all those numbers and all that factual stuff that he brought up earlier, that's the important bulk of this. But with respect to the other stuff that he was talking about, because I know that's also part of this, the discussion about who is going to buy Warner Bros. Discovery and what are they going to do? Are they going to mess with DC Studios or not? And I know there's so many of you are worried about this. I know this. Many of you are legitimately concerned that if certain companies buy Warner Brothers Discovery, then that's it for James Gunn and that's it for Peter Safran because their ideas are quote unquote too woke for the new ownership. Well, here, I'm just going to go ahead and click on the other links that Hughes has here. So there's that one about any changes the buyer wanted to implement would likely fall within a narrow range. So now I wait to see exactly what this link goes to. Oh, it says DC Studios Batman plans may change in Paramount or Netflix Warner Brothers Discovery buyout. So this was a piece that Hughes apparently wrote back in September. And honestly, after skimming through it a bit, it looks like it's just more speculation on his part on, what a new buyer might do as it relates to Batman's role in the DCU and Batman's role with DC Studios in general. Okay, so that's really a nothing piece because, again, I don't care about speculation. And that's something that does bug me. Like Forbes, I really feel should stick to numbers and should stick to facts. I'm really not interested whatsoever in their speculation on things. This is why I wouldn't pay for a Forbes membership, which now the pop-up just came up. I can either get it for $9.99 monthly or $74.99 billed annually, which apparently is less than $1.50 a week. No, thank you. I'm not paying money for Mark Hughes to speculate on what he thinks is going to happen with the DCU. I don't care. I don't care about speculation. I'm only interested in numbers. So is that it? Won't let me go any further? Won't let me click on that other link? Okay, fine. Whatever. It is what it is. I got what I wanted out of it, which was those numbers that he was talking about. And those numbers, he didn't get them from nowhere, right? He didn't just pull them out of his ass. Like, Mark Hughes, I will at least say, when it comes to numbers and factual data, he does have sources for that. And again, you got to remember the wording that he chose. He said profits. He said, he's talking about earnings. He didn't specify exactly what they were. So all these people that want to argue about ticket sales, all these people that want to argue about box office and whatnot, he didn't say that. He said profits. And he said 100 to 150 million globally when it is all said and done, profit-wise. That encompasses box office. That can encompass VOD, digital sales. It can encompass whatever they think the streaming reach is on HBO Max. There's a lot of stuff with respect to that. And we know that, that it was a big darling. Superman and Peacemaker Season 2 were big hits numbers-wise as reported by HBO Max. And that kind of gets into my ultimate, the ultimate hammer in all of this. And I've said this many times before, and I will continue to reiterate this. As people continue to argue profitability, as they continue to argue about whether or not Superman is profitable, whether or not the DCEU, or the DCU rather, whether or not the DCU is making any money or, really going to be this game-changing scenario for Warner Bros. Discovery, the fact of the matter is, all that matters is not the numbers. It doesn't come down to what we find. It doesn't come down to the data that we look at, because all the data that we find is just used to fuel our own speculation. The studio determines what is going to happen. And right now, the studio is proceeding forward. We've heard nothing about Lanterns being shelved. We've heard nothing about Supergirl or Clayface being used for tax write-offs, have we? Right? We haven't heard the Batgirl treatment for either one of them. So, as far as we're concerned, DC Studios, Warner Brothers Discovery has put their full throat 100% support into DC Studios We hear nothing of dissension. We hear nothing of these reports of, oh, they're going to change this and they're not happy about that. We've heard nothing from that from Scooper Madness. And best believe Chattanooga FBI and all those other morons would be so quick to report anything that was even remotely in the way of dissension with respect to the profitability or with respect to the future of the DCU. They would be so ready. They are so starved to get us cracking at information, right? To get us chomping at the bit for anything. They'll gaslight us. In fact, they've been trying to gaslight us. You know how Scooper Madness is? Scooper Madness is half gaslighting at least with respect to what they push out there with headlines and with speculation and whatnot. But we've heard nothing about that. We've heard no dissension. We've heard no issues. We've heard no trouble. As far as we're concerned, the DC Studios plan and the DCU plan is moving forward, and that is all that matters. What the studio tells us is all that matters. And if the studio is telling us that they're moving forward, then game over. It doesn't matter what your argument is. It doesn't matter how profitable or not you think Superman is. The DCU is moving forward. DC Studios is continuing forward. So all of your hopes and dreams rest only on the merit, only on the idea, rather, the delusional idea that any one of these other studios would just uproot that plan. Now, I can give you my opinion with respect to that if you're interested. I've given it before with respect to Paramount, and my opinion on Paramount still stands. If Paramount ends up buying Warner Brothers Discovery and they get DC Studios, they're going to let Gunn and Safran continue unabated. Because David Ellison, the Ellisons, need content in order to shore up their library to compete with Netflix. And they're not going to just shelve a 10-year plan full of content unless that content isn't making money. That's the only time that they would interfere. And that's probably the same for any of the other big studios, right? If it's Paramount, they're not changing shit. They're going to let Gunn and Safran continue on because they need the content for the future. They're happy that there are 3 movies, 2 that are, have wrapped filming or in post-production, a show that's getting ready to launch in the spring, and then another movie, a sequel to their $600 million plus hit that beat out the Marvel movies and beat out the last 9 DCEU movies at the box office, a sequel to that planned for May of 2027. They're happy with that because that's content that they can market. That's something that they can use to draw people to their services because they'll surely merge Paramount Plus and HBO Max at that point, should that occur. So they're going to leave DC Studios alone. I think Universal also would largely leave the DCU plan intact, but they might make some minute changes with respect to Batman and the direction that the DCU wants to go. And they're probably thinking, and I say that because they're probably thinking Universal Studios, they're probably thinking what they want to do with licensing and marketing. So that aspect of that would enter into the DCU picture and would change that particular portion of it. And how much of the DCU plan that would alter, I don't know. But that is something that I think Universal would take into account. And it would be minute changes. It would not be anything big whatsoever. I think that largely Gunn and Safran's plan would still continue, but they would not uproot them either. If either of the whales, Apple or Amazon, bought Warner Brothers and had control of DC Studios, I don't think that'd uproot a damn thing. I think they would be even more, they'd be even less hands-on than either Paramount or Universal. They'd just be like, hey, keep doing what you're doing. Let's roll. You know what? Doesn't even matter if you're all that successful at the theater or not. Let's go, just keep it rolling. And at least, I'll say this about Apple and Amazon, at least they are not allergic to physical media. They are not allergic to the idea of things not being on a streaming service. They're not allergic to digital sales. They're not allergic to physical sales. I got a copy of F1 on my shelf. F1 is an Apple film, the Apple film with Damson Idris and Brad Pitt. I haven't watched it yet. I blind bought it or reserved it. I've got it sitting on my shelf. So I know Apple isn't afraid of physical releases. I know Amazon isn't necessarily afraid of physical releases. I don't know that I have any, but I think they have sold some physical releases, and I know they've done theatrical releases. Both Apple and Amazon have done theatrical releases, so they're not fearful of either of those because, again, not their primary industry. Their primary industries are tech and commerce in that regard, so they look at the content as the marketing arm to get people to buy their products, right? So they'll be even less hands-on if they were to buy it. No, the one you got to worry about is Netflix. The one you 1,000% have to worry about is Netflix. And no, they would not restore the Snyderverse. They would not. They absolutely would not restore the Snyderverse, especially not in the wake of Rebel Moon not being the massive hit that they were hoping it to be, right? We enjoy Rebel Moon, right? Those of us that really like Zack Snyder's work, we enjoy Rebel Moon, we enjoy Army of the Dead, Twilight of the Gods, and all that stuff, right? And it's not that Netflix, I mean, I don't know where Netflix stands with Zack Snyder at this point. But this idea that you think that they're just going to all of a sudden, that you think they're going to ignore the last 9 DCEU films and go straight back to the Snyderverse? No. No, 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 no. That most certainly will not happen. And you're talking about a studio in Netflix, a company that has absolutely no experience in handling or marketing franchises. They're not good at it. They don't do that. Remember all of the TV shows that you were really excited for on Netflix and you're upset that they canceled them after a season or two? You want to see that happen with DC content? Because it would. It most certainly would. They're the ones most likely to upheave any and everything about the DCU plan, because if it doesn't hit their massive opening weekend numbers on streaming, and yes, it would be streaming, right? You want to see all these movies all of a sudden not get the big, huge theatrical releases that they've been getting. You want to see DC movies be like Netflix first, theatrical later, and then you got to drive 50 to 100 miles out of your city to go find a theater that's going to play it. You want that? I mean, that may seem like an extreme example, but this is what Netflix has done. Netflix has a pedigree of doing this. They're the biggest ones to worry about by far, buying Warner Brothers Discovery and getting a hold of DC Studios. So any of you that are rooting for them because you're so worried that the Ellisons are just going to make DC great again, no, I vehemently disagree with you on that. I do not believe that is the case, because as I've said many times before, and I will reiterate further, these one percenters and these CEOs and these studios care less about red and blue and way more about green. As long as you're making money, you can do whatever you want. David Zaslav is one of them, and he created DC Studios and hired Gunn and Safran to run it. He's the one that took a victory lap for Superman while Fox News was calling it super woke. Keep that in mind. Seriously. All of you who are so fearful and terrified that the Ellisons are just going to turn DC Studios into a Fox News Breitbart clone and hire Gina Carano and Kevin Spacey and Jim Caviezel to do all of their films. No, that's not how this works. That's not how these businesses operate. So seriously, get some perspective on that, I suggest, right? That is my suggestion to you. You can sit there and shake in your boots all you like. I realize that we live in unprecedented times, and I realize that I can't give you a 100% diagnosis on that, but I can give you a very educated guess on that based on the history of the industry, based on the history of what these studios have done. Okay, I know you're hearing about all these changes happening to all these places and what the legacy media and whatnot are doing, but you got to remember it's all about profit. It's all about eyeballs. It's all about attention. That's all they want. When you hear about the marketing stuff and about how did my phone know I wanted to see this? How did my phone know I wanted to go there? It's because they want to sell you shit. It's not just people are so convinced, oh, they're watching us to do it. Yeah, they're watching your habits because they want you to buy shit. They want you to be involved in their commerce. It's capitalism. That's what capitalism does. Greed is good to them. They're all Gordon Geckos. They're all Gordon Geckos. Modern day Gordon Geckos in that regard. Just remember that. At the end of the day, they care about money more than they care about any political ideology. Money is their political ideology. Capitalism is their political ideology. And as long as they're making money, they don't give a shit what Superman does, says, or is, as long as he is making them money. Period. So, just wanted to once again give my thoughts on that and talk about this whole the Superman numbers deal, and just again debunking more of the further ridiculous narratives that all of these grifters and whatnot and Scooper Madness and everybody is trying to get you on. And there's some real, red hat sites, some real nerd MAGA sites that are trying to push this idea that Superman is this horrific flop. And, a lot of these people, this is unfortunately where Zack Snyder gets a bad rep for like the type of filmmaker and person that he is, because a lot of these people that, claim to be his fans don't follow the same ideology and are not nearly as open-minded as he is in that regard. These are very bigoted, disgusting individuals that are pushing these false narratives, cosmic book news and bounding into comics and all these morons, all these disgusting humps of people that just want to push this idea that James Gunn is such a failure and Superman is such a failure. No, it's objectively false. Objectively false. Not only by the numbers, but by the studio's reaction, period. And the studio's reaction, which is the end-all be-all, is the DCU continues on and DC Studios continues on. Bottom line. So, there you have it. Take all of that to the damn bank, factually speaking. Sometimes it's not always subjective. Sometimes it truly is objective in terms of data and presence and actions. And then you can form your own subjective opinion based on what you see from the data in front of you. And we can agree to disagree on that. But quite frankly, if you're trying to argue that the DCU and DC Studios is in trouble, you really don't have any objective data to stand on whatsoever with respect to that. You only have your subjective opinion, and it's a weak subjective opinion if that is the one that you indeed have at this point in time. Just saying, just throwing a friendly warning out there for anybody that really wants to try and drop trial in the DCU. Hughes, for that point of his article, before he got into all the speculative nonsense that I didn't care about, that part of his article was spot on. The numbers and the data points that he brought up, and as well as the perspective of the studio, absolutely on point. Completely spot on. So those are the things to remember, guys, with respect to that. With any of these discussions going forward, regardless of whomever buys Warner Brothers Discovery, whether it's before or after the split, and ultimately, becomes Peter Safran and James Gunn's new bosses going forward. And that's really all I've got for this particular episode of the Flightcast. Just a deep dive into the profitability of Superman and the Mark Hughes piece and the numbers that he presents and the argument that he most certainly effectively conveys with respect to tearing down all these nonsensical narratives that haters of James Gunn and the DCU want to spin with this idea that Superman isn't profitable. It's subjectively false in that regard. So there you have it. But as always, thank you so much for listening to this show. Thank you so much for supporting the Flightcast. If you have any thoughts on this, because I'm sure a number of you read that piece if you got past the paywall, if maybe you had some free articles like I did before it told me it wanted $75 for a year, which I am not paying that, not for Forbes, absolutely not. But if you have any thoughts on this, if you have any thoughts on any of the other narratives and whatnot that you're seeing, or if you have any thoughts on movies, TV, and other assorted media in general that you want to share on the Feedback Show for this weekend, you know where to find me on Instagram and Threads at the Flightcast, on BLUESKY at Flightcast. You can also comment on the posting for this particular episode on the Flightcast YouTube channel at youtube.com/theflightcast. There's also the Flightcast Facebook page. And, of course, I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care. Stay safe out there. Have a great rest of the week. And I will see you all next time. Take it easy.